Hello, welcome back to another episode of Inside the Data on Inside the Birds. And of course, I'm Geoff Mosher alongside the data expert, the analytics man, Sam Finkel. What is it that one of our readers once called you? Analytics guy? Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is a question for the analytics guy. Well, you are the analytics guy, Sam. And we have two more good questions that we've gotten submitted to insidethebirds@gmail.com for you. And what I think we're going to do is be able to answer these questions and then sort of turn the page in the next few additions to Inside the Data to this year's team, because the questions are obviously that we're getting are still from last year, and that's great. Won the Super Bowl. People want to relive that. But pretty soon we'll start to formulate some ideas of some good analytical projects for the 2025 Philadelphia Eagles. Does that sound like a good idea?
Oh, I'm very excited for that, for sure.
Yeah. Now, the Eagles are in the middle of training camp, and it's hard right now, right, Sam? Because, it's hard to do analytical stuff until we know exactly who's playing what position and we can concretely say, what they might look like in 2025. But for now, there's some good competition going on. Have you been following?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks to you and the other people at Inside the Birds, there's some great content and great coverage. So definitely keep looking at that stuff.
All right, good stuff. Thank you. And please continue to submit questions for Sam at insidethebirds@gmail.com. So, Sam, our first question is about last year and specifically how the Eagles did against top pass rushers. Well, we know the Eagles won the Super Bowl. We know the Eagles had the number one defense. So, on the surface, we can probably say they did pretty well. And we also know they had one of the best, if not the best, offensive lines in the sport. So, we could probably surmise they did pretty well against the top pass rushers. But it is always good to go deeper inside the numbers, right? And see exactly how well they did. So I will, in a second, bring up the screen of the charts that you put together, and we will start to take the scalpel and forceps to it. All right. So this was a little bit subjective, right? And you and I collaborated and said, well, top 10 pass rusher is a very subjective kind of category. So you and I had to pick out some of the best ones. So how did you go about deciding which ones you were going to take to
Yeah,
measure?
I mean, even before that, I think it's important to understand the process that I didn't just look at the offensive line because these pass rushers didn't always go against the same guys. So when we talked about it, we decided that the best approach was to look at how these pass rushers performed. And we talked about doing win rate. And so I went in PFF and I looked at the win rate, and then I realized they don't have individual game win rates.
Right.
So I had to make an audible on that. And I decided to just look at how they produced on average throughout the season, and then look at that compared to how they produced versus the Eagles in that one game.
Nice.
And then to decide who makes the top pass rushers, I looked at who generated the most sacks and who generated the most pressures, and I just picked among that list. There were a couple guys that arguably could have been chosen as well, but I think I have a pretty good mix of, ones that are considered the top generational pass rushers right now on the edge, and then a couple young guys too. So it's
Sure. Yeah, it
pretty
makes
good.
sense. Yeah, absolutely. I know, to your point, and we'll get to him in a second. If you go look at the stats per se for Jared Verse, who was a rookie last year, I think he only had a few sacks. Nothing's going to jump out at you like, oh my God, this is 12 and a half sacks like Micah Parsons guy. But I think he had more sacks in the playoffs, right, than in the actual regular season. And by the time the playoffs came along, this man had become a force. And I think he's going to be a really good edge rusher and a good player this year coming up. So I believe he is on this list, correct?
He is,
Yeah.
and a great example of one of the young guys that you're right, it's going to be a problem for years to come.
Yeah. So let's go through some of the guys that you chose. And obviously, we start with Trey Hendrickson of the Bengals, right? One of the just annual year in, year out top pass rushers in the league. It's sort of amazing that the Bengals haven't figured out how to pay him, considering that he's like literally their only good defensive player. But that's not for a discussion for us. Our discussion is how the Eagles fare against him. And before we get into it, I believe you have it marked. Yeah. This is the game I believe Fred Johnson had to start at left tackle, I think in place of Jordan Mailata, if I'm not mistaken.
There were a couple games where that happened, actually.
Right.
So the Jaguars game
Mhm.
that happened, and then one of the Cowboys games that happened too. I'm not sure if that happened for the Bengals game 100%.
Okay. I thought he
Uh,
had played in the Bengals game, but I also could be wrong. I'll go take a yeah, he did. He
okay,
did. He
there you go.
started. I just don't remember if it was at left or right tackle, but he played 100% of the offensive snaps in that game. So
There
he
you go.
definitely. All right.
So this
So
is even more impressive than I would
yeah,
say.
yeah. So let's go through this data and tell us what the charts for those who are watching at home or those who are listening. I'm sorry, those who are watching can see this charts. For those who are listening, why don't Sam you break down the 2, 4, 6, 8 categories here that you've chosen?
Sure. So the categories chosen were sacks,
Mm-hmm.
sack percentage, which is just sacks over total pass rush attempts, quarterback pressures, quarterback pressure percents, which is again is just the percent of pressures over pass rush attempts, time to sack, time to pressure, quick
Mm-hmm.
quarterback pressures,
Mm-hmm.
which are just quarterback pressures under 3 seconds, and
Mm-hmm.
get off, which is until they cross the line of scrimmage.
Right.
Super, pretty easy standard metrics.
By the way, I really appreciate that you isolate sack percentage from sacks because I mean, look at a team like the Eagles that this year, especially, right? They could have 3 or 4 different guys in pass rushing roles, and the number of sacks may not be as impressive as your sack percentage because you could be playing far fewer snaps than say Micah Parsons, who's doesn't come off the field a lot of times. So I
Yeah.
think that is a more impressive, or it can be a more impressive indicator of the type of pressure and sacks that you're creating.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, and that's hopefully it'll give a good indication of how these guys actually fared in their one game. Now that being said, again, it's some of these analyses that are just their one game aren't always indicative of a great representation of
Sure.
the actual ability. So that being said, I do want to caveat that with these kind of analyses, it's
Hmm.
still very fun and still good to do, and it's good to pull small samples from a bigger field of work. So it'll still be good analysis, but
Hmm.
one game is hard to say that this is representative of how they actually would perform always against the Eagles, if that makes
Of
sense.
course. Of course. Yeah. This is, and that's why I think we chose, several pass rushers to not just go off one game, even though it's one game per pass rusher.
Sure.
And you've also done a good job of giving what these pass rushers done against the rest of the NFL on average. But we can only go with the data that we're given.
Absolutely.
So
And
what do we learn about I'm sorry, go ahead. You were going to say
well, I was
something.
gonna say it's the regular season data. That's another
Right.
thing I wanted to.
Got it.
But if you look at Trey Hendrickson,
Hmm.
I think a good way to start with this is how he fared against the NFL, right? So he averaged 1.06 sacks per game
Hmm.
at a clip of 3.6%. He averaged 5.41 quarterback pressures at a clip of 18.9%. It took him about 4.17 seconds on average to time to sack and only 2.6 seconds in time to pressure. He averaged 2.71 quick quarterback pressures per game, and his get off was 0.73.
Wow. These are really good numbers that people will, I think, find even more impressive as we go along because he is the only main pass rusher that the Bengals have. I mean, they drafted Shamar Stewart. Who knows about this coming year, right? But last year, he's the guy that everybody drew the circle around. And we'll look at some other players, Parsons, Garrett, TJ Watt, who you can say there are some pretty good interior and exterior rushers around this guy. But for the Bengals, it's really just him, and some of his percentages are up there, if not better, than some of the guys I mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at his statistics versus the Eagles, it's kind of impressive what the Eagles offensive line did, especially with Fred Johnson having to start. Um,
Yeah.
so if you look, he didn't get a sack. So
Hmm.
obviously there's no sack percentage. And he had 2 quarterback pressures at a rate of 12.5%, which again is lower than what he averaged at 5.41 and 18.9%.
Hmm.
Obviously, there's no time to sack if you don't get a sack. And his time to pressure was the same. It was 2.6. No quick QB pressures, so nothing, no pressures under 3 seconds, which is impressive because his time to pressure was 2.6. So you would think that it would be that, but it just means like on average he had one that was fast, but it wasn't considered even a pressure. And his get off was 0.72, which actually was faster. So it's even more impressive that he played faster. He got across the line of scrimmage faster, and yet they only kept him to 2 pressures.
Yeah, that is impressive. He got his get off was faster, and his time to pressure was the same as it was against the rest of the league for last year, and yet he was not able to create a pressure. Or I'm sorry, he wasn't able to create more than 2 pressures, which is and his pressure percentage was lower. So that speaks to A, probably the offensive line, especially with a backup, and B, probably Jalen Hurts being able to know where he's at and getting rid of the ball before a pressure can be created.
Yeah, and actually, like it's a little bit statistically impossible that his quick QB pressure wouldn't be 1. So I'm thinking that the source data may have been wrong. That was on NFL Pro, because if you think about it, if his time to pressure is the same, quick quarterback pressure is just under 3 seconds.
Right.
So he had 1 pressure that was longer and 1 that was shorter. So his quick quarterback pressure probably should be 1. But I went off of what NFL Pro had on the numbers.
But he averages close to 3 per game. So even 1 is a pretty, with a backup is a pretty good job by the Eagles anyway.
Yeah, it's still better. But I
Yes.
do want to point that out, that's what it probably should be. But
Right.
again, I can't make up numbers, and I'm not going to. So
Fair enough. Fair enough. So let's move on to Myles Garrett, who is arguably the best pass edge rusher in the NFL. Just signed a huge deal in the offseason that made him the sport's highest paid player, I think, or defensive end until TJ Watt just signed one. So let's go with Myles Garrett and compare him, how he did versus the Eagles versus the NFL.
Sure. Versus the NFL, he averaged 0.82 sacks per game. 3.1% of his plays were sacks. 4.94 QB pressures per game. 18.6% pressure rate. His time to sack was 4.01, and his time to pressure was 2.81. And he was averaging 2.35 quick quarterback pressures per game, again, under 3 seconds. And his get off was 0.7, which is even faster than Trey Hendrickson.
Right. But however, as I was saying before, some of these statistics, he was a little behind Hendrickson in sack percentage and pressure percentage, which is a similar situation, though, where Garrett on that defensive line was the only guy that people were really, really scared about. They have some decent rushers, but nothing like him. And so he still puts up pretty good numbers, but it just showed you how Trey Hendrickson really sometimes flies under the radar, but is just as good as anyone out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Garrett versus the Eagles, 0 sacks, 0%, obviously. He had 1 more QB pressure than Hendrickson at 3. And his quarterback pressure rate was much higher at 16.7, but still lower than his average. Obviously, 0 time to sack. His time to pressure was actually faster than his league average. So it was 2.3 to 2.81, which is the only category at which he did better against the Eagles than against the rest of the NFL.
Right.
He had 2 quick quarterback pressures, and his get off was slower at 0.74, which is still pretty fast, by the way.
Yeah.
Pretty impressive.
This is the guy who's considered the best at the league in his position, and he didn't have a sack, a couple of pressures, but less than the 5 that he averages per game, and a lower percentage of percentage pressure. So they did a pretty good job. And this is the game, by the way, where I believe it was Lane who got hurt, and then Fred Johnson came in, because this game occurred first on the schedule. I know that Fred Johnson played 13 snaps in that game, and then he started the next week against the Giants, then the Bengals, and the Jaguars, then the Cowboys. So
yeah, absolutely. Again, that's even more impressive.
Yeah, 100%. All right. Let us look at the next 2 guys, and these are some big guns right here: Micah Parsons and TJ Watt.
Yes. And I know originally we almost didn't put TJ Watt on here But I looked at it, and he played enough snaps where I thought it was justified to keep him on here.
Right. So this is that he'll be one where sack percentage might be more because he didn't play the entire game, or he played limited snaps against the Eagles, right?
Right.
Okay.
I think he got hurt either in the third or fourth quarter, so it wasn't as bad as
Okay.
originally anticipated. Regardless, let's get into Micah first.
Okay.
So Micah only played 13 games this season,
Mhm.
so I think that's an important understanding going into looking at him. But in those 13 games, he's averaged 0.92 sacks at a clip of 3.1%. His
Mhm.
QB pressures were 5.77 with a clip of 19.1%. His time to sack was 4.8. His time to pressure was 2.74. His quick quarterback pressures were 2.54 a game. And his get off was 0.77.
Mhm.
And just those compared to the other guys, he's right up there with them on all pretty much every stat.
Yeah, this just in. Micah Parsons is good. He's a good player. That sack percentage at 3.1, I mean, that's right up there with Garrett, a little bit lower than Hendrickson, and the 0.92, which is like a sack a game, is even better than Garrett's. So good stuff.
Yeah, he's pretty impressive for sure.
Right.
And hopefully the Cowboys can't figure out how to pay him. So, but
So against the Eagles, how did he do comparatively?
so here's what's interesting. Obviously, he played 2 games against the Eagles, so you had to kind of look at, his numbers and divide them by 2. And so you have 1.0 sacks, which means he had 2 sacks against them.
Mhm.
So everything was, his average. His sack percent was 5.4%. His QB pressures was 4, which would means it was 8. His QB pressure percentage was 12.5%. His time to sack was 4.83. His time to
Mhm.
pressure was 2.59. He had 2 quick quarterback pressures, which means he had 4, and his get off was 0.76 in both games.
Right.
And so if you look at those, it's pretty actually pretty even. He had more sacks than average against the
Mhm.
Eagles at
Mhm.
a higher clip. But he had less quarterback pressures at a
Mhm.
lower clip. His time to sack was a little bit
Longer.
slower, which was better
Yeah.
for the Eagles,
Yeah.
but his time to pressure was quicker, which was obviously worse. And then he had less quick quarterback pressures than he did against average teams, and his get off was almost the same. He was a
Okay.
little bit faster.
Right.
And then I went back and I watched his 2 sacks, and they
Mhm.
both were against Fred Johnson.
Ah, there you go. So, I mean, this is a really good job then against Micah Parsons, one of the best in the league. I particularly think the percentage here is it took it his sack was at 5.4%, right?
Yeah,
His normal one is 3.1%. So that to me is a pretty dramatic drop. And then you have a 2 game sample, not even just a 1 game sample. So they did a pretty good job against him. Kept him lower, way lower on the quarterback pressure percentage from 19 down to 12.5, right? Even though he had a little bit faster of a get off, and even though his time to pressure was a little lower. So when he did cause a pressure, he was causing it faster than normal, but his number of pressures or overall percentage of them were far lower against the Eagles than the rest of the league.
great, well said for sure.
Awesome.
And I'm actually not even sure if Fred Johnson was credited on the sack, by the way, because what he did is he started with him and then he rushed inside and just cleaned up
Right.
basically on both sacks. Actually, it was
This,
pretty interesting.
glad you brought that up. This is why when we were discussing how to go for this, we didn't want to do sort of win rate versus lineman, right? Because that could take forever, and because of twisting and stunting, and a lot of these guys are always on the move. So we evaluated it as an offensive line as a whole against a pass rusher, which I thought was the better way to do it.
Absolutely.
All right, great. T.J. Watt, who, as you said, got injured during the game, but he still played roughly 3 quarters. So we have enough of a sample size to see how he did.
Absolutely. So against, the NFL, he averages 0.68 sacks per game, which is the lowest that we've seen so far, at a sack percent of 2.2%. He
Mhm.
averaged 2.88 quarterback pressures per game at a rate of 9.4%. His time to sack was 4.59. His time to pressure was 3.05. He averaged 1.06 quick quarterback pressures, and his get off was 0.83, which again is the worst out of pretty much on all of them that we've seen.
Right.
And yet he gave the Eagles a lot of trouble. He did. And if you look, he wins on 5 categories against the Eagles. He wins in sacks, sack percentage, QB pressures, QB pressure percent, time to sack.
Yeah. Wow. His sack percentage is a big thing. And again, it's just one game and not even a full game. So this can be skewed by just having 3 straight really good pass rushes in a row. And I think, do we say, was anybody hurt in this game?
I'm not sure. I know Goddard was not playing, which if you want to take that as a part of it.
No, that's a huge part of it. I do remember this because they did play a lot of 12 personnel against the Steelers. They came out and did a lot of hurry up in that game. And I think it is because Calcaterra in for Goddard, we know his blocking isn't great. And he was asked at times to have to stand alone block on TJ Watt.
Yeah, actually, both sacks involved Calcaterra.
Well, there you go.
I watched them, and Calcaterra and Gainwell both chipped him on a play, and then Lane went for cover up, but Jalen stepped up in the pocket, and Lane isn't credited for the sack because, the quarterback moved up in the pocket, and that was where the sack happened. The second sack was Calcaterra chip, and then Lane went to support it, and then he just got around Lane, and honestly, I think the sack was probably credited against Jalen because he just held the ball for way longer than you probably needed to in that situation.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the circumstances by how the sacks actually happened.
And by the way, this is a good time to notice that note before we move to the next one, that Jalen Hurts took a ridiculous number of sacks for a winning quarterback and a team that won the Super Bowl last year. I have the numbers in front of me. It was the most of his career in terms of not only sacks, which was 38. That actually ties for the most, but his sack percentage was 9.52, which was, I think, the 4th highest among starting quarterbacks in the league and way higher than his career average of 7.22. So he did a phenomenal job of holding onto the ball when he got sacked. But just because we always say sacks aren't always an offensive line stat. In some cases, yes, like Calcaterra misses a chip, that's bad, or Gainwell can't hold his pass protection, that's bad. But also some of the best pass rushers didn't do well against the Eagles, even though Hurts took an absurd number of sacks, which to itself is pretty amazing.
Yeah, and I think maybe one day in the offseason next year, maybe we can go into why certain sacks are credited against offensive linemen and why they're not. That might be a fun exercise. But like you said, we're going to go back into 2025 content soon. So
right. All right, we'll go to Jared Verse, and like I was saying before, this guy is a guy who really heated up in the playoffs, more so in the regular season. So some of his regular season numbers, you may look at this chart if you're watching and say, why are you using this guy, compared to Micah Parsons? But this guy's going to be the real deal. So we threw him on the list.
Yeah, and honestly, his bread and butter for the regular season was pressures rather than sacks. So I mean, he just got to finish, and he did finish, obviously, in the playoff run. And he probably will, that sack percentage will go up way higher in the upcoming season.
Right. So, wow, that pressure percentage is pretty good. As I look at it now and I go back and look at some of the others, it's pretty darn good for a rookie.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. So he had 0.35 sacks per game, 1% sack rate. His quarterback pressure was 4.47 with the 16.8% clip, which is the one we were saying was impressive. His time to sack was 4.66. His time to pressure was 2.8. He averaged 1.59 quick quarterback pressures, and his get off was 0.83.
All right. And against the Eagles?
Eagles managed to keep him to 0 sacks, 1 pressure, 5.3% of the rate, 0 time to sack. His time to pressure was significantly faster than his average time to pressure at 1.9. And obviously it's a quick quarterback pressure, but his get off was the same as his average.
Right. So his time to pressure was really just from that one pressure because he only had one.
Yeah.
Right. So it just happened to be a really good pressure on that. Who knows what happened? It could have been like a play action where he was right there. We have no idea. But the point is, it's a very small sample size on that timed pressure.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right. Didn't want to forget a guy who often flies under the radar, Josh Hines Allen. So we can no longer have to confuse him with the quarterback, Josh Allen. Do you remember the game where they played against each other and Josh Allen sacked Josh Allen?
I do remember that. That was,
That was
it's awesome on the stat sheet too.
right. I think they were in the same draft also, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious.
It is. But Josh Hines Allen is one of the better sort of under-discussed pass rushers in the league every year.
Yeah. He was talked about a lot during his rookie season and maybe his second season, and then it just kind of fell off, even though his play has been pretty decent.
Yes. So what do we see from him against the rest of the NFL?
So he's averaging a sack every other game, 0.5, 1.8%. Quarterback pressure is 4.19. Quarterback pressure percent, 14.9%. Time to sack, 4.63. Time to pressure, 3 seconds. Averaging 0.81 quick quarterback pressures per game. And his get off was 0.85.
Yeah.
Now, interestingly enough, I believe this is, it is the absolute best performance against the Eagles.
Yes.
It was him or TJ Watt, but he beats TJ Watt by one category. TJ Watt only won 5 of the 8. Josh Hines Allen won 6 of the 8.
Yeah.
And I looked at both of his sacks too. One was against Fred Johnson and one was against Calcaterra.
Man, the answers to the test are there sometimes, right? I mean, that's great extra work by you to figure out where those pressures came from or where some of them came from. And that's a big difference when you're comparing it versus Jordan Mailata and Dallas Goedert. And, yes, the Eagles won a Super Bowl. It's great. And they were able to overcome their deficiencies. But it kind of shows you why this year in camp, they are really honed in on trying to find good backup offensive linemen. Because in general, Fred Johnson did a good job. It's certainly no shame to give up a sack to Josh Allen or a pressure. But Grant Calcaterra has really hurt them at times in the blocking game. And, they brought in a bunch of different tight ends. And they have a guy like E.J. Jenkins, who's 260 pounds, I believe, 250, something like that, converted big wide receiver as a tight end and have worked with him on blocking.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you just want to look at these stats really quickly, it was 2 sacks against the Eagles that we just talked about, 8.7%. Quarterback pressure is 4, which was less than his average. Very close, though. 17.4% quarterback pressure rate, which is higher than his average. His time to sack was 4.57, which was faster. His time to pressure was 2.88, which was faster. No quick. Again, it probably should have a quick QB pressure here. I'm not sure why NFL Pro had 0. This is another instance where I marked it as why is it less, even though his time to pressure is less, which means statistically it's impossible for it to not have a quick quarterback pressure. So it's possible that he loses on this one too. So but again, I can't make up the numbers. I have to go on what's based on there. And his get off was faster. So there you go.
So I wonder sometimes if there's a psychological element for a pass rusher. When you see someone who has a faster get off, a faster time to pressure, especially the get off, because your get off should consistently be what it is if you're just that good of a player, right? And I wonder if you kind of see a backup lineman across from you or a backup tight end that can't block, and it just gives you that extra adrenaline sometimes, and you shoot off the ball a little harder,
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure that's the case, especially if you have film on a guy's weaknesses. And your skill set, you can take care of that. So
definitely. All right, so that answers that question of how the Eagles. That was it. That was the last guy.
That was the last guy.
That was about 8 or 9 different guys, and you can see Eagles did really well last year, and they should be in pretty good hands again this year. Most of those guys, Sam, were edge rushers. Some of them moved around a little bit, and you mentioned some of them sort of got their pressures off of either a backup lineman or a backup tight end trying to block. But with the current state of the Eagles' offensive line, you would think they should be all right again. To me, the real question would be, can Jalen Hurts continue to take that many sacks that he did? Which, by the way, probably came against a lot of the not of the best. I feel like most of Jalen Hurts' sacks were almost those distributable sacks because he would hold on, and then he would just crumble under a pile of 2 or 3 guys who would get to him, but he would hold on to the ball. And
Absolutely.
then, to see another down or punt. I wonder how sustainable that is for him to have such a high sack rate and such a low turnover rate, fumble rate, comparatively when your offensive line is doing a really good job against some of the elite pass rushers.
Sure. And again, we only looked at edges, so there a lot of interior pressure was not, looked at in this particular study.
Awesome. All right. We will get to the next question in the next mailbag. That's going to do it for this edition of Inside the Data. For Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. Thanks for watching Inside the Data on Inside the Birds.